Have you ever thought about what cats think about all day or what their behaviors mean? Have you ever wondered how we can better communicate with them? Although cats are the world's most popular companion animal, we still have so much to learn about the science behind how cats think and why they behave the way they do. CatSci podcasts will bring you the current science behind cat behavior and cognition. Our aim is to find ways to apply this knowledge to training and enrichment opportunities, which can stimulate your cat's mind and strengthen the bond that you share with them. Welcome to our first episode. My name is Kristen Vitale. I'm a researcher studying cat behavior and cognition, and I've worked with cats for the past 13 years in a variety of different ways. Recently, I received my PhD in animal science from Oregon State University, where my main project was looking at the impact of kitten training classes on the human-cat bond. I also have a master's degree, and I received this from Miami University in Ohio, and my main project there was looking at free-roaming colony cat behavior and examining what factors influence that. I'm still conducting research on cat behavior and cognition, and I also offer training and socialization opportunities to cats as well. I'm really happy to be joined on this podcast by a co-host, and I'll let Tori go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tori Peterson. I've trained many different species of animals from fish to goats and even a yak. Now I'm a dog and cat trainer and behavior consultant based in Madison, Wisconsin. I have my Bachelor's of Science in Small Animal Science with an emphasis in animal behavior. I own an online cat training school called Space Cat Academy, where I'm dedicated to teaching cat guardians that cats can learn to do many of the same tricks and manners that we teach dogs. I also work with cat guardians who are frustrated with their cat's behavior and help to solve these issues with positive reinforcement methods.
I thought it might be fun to start by talking about some of the animals in our lives. So, Tori, tell me a little bit about the animals in your household.
Yeah, so I have a cat named Peach. We found her on the side of the road about 2 years ago. She ran out in front of us with this little orange blur, and she was all messed up. She had puncture wounds on her face and her shoulder, and we brought her home and decided to keep her. And she turned out to be the most affectionate and wild cat that I have ever seen. We also have a 6-year-old Central Asian Shepherd named Nikki, who you may hear her tags are barking at some point in this. And she has a lot of the same qualities that we love in cats. She's very independent and has a lot of cat-like behaviors. What about you?
I have 4 cats. My oldest is Macy. She is a Maine Coon mix and was actually born blind, but she actually does pretty well, navigating around the house and everything. And then we also have Bo. He just showed up at our house after we moved to Oregon, and he actually had a bite wound in his neck, and so it was just kind of one of those things. We couldn't really leave him out there, so we brought him in and got him fixed up and everything. And then about a year ago, my husband and I were actually on a bike ride, and we saw some kittens on the side of the road, and they were just in a plastic container and didn't have any water or anything. And so we decided, can't really leave them out there, same kind of thing, and decided to bring them back. And we ended up keeping them, and so their names are Carl and Kevin, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot about them in this podcast as well.
Oh, those are some great success stories. So did you grow up with cats?
Oh yeah, I've had cats as long as I can remember. As a kid, we always just kind of had a string of cats that would show up outside, and I would just kind of start secretly feeding them, and the cats would stick around. And then I would have to convince my parents, "Oh, we should just bring this cat in." So, it was definitely something I just, always loved cats growing up and wanted a cat in the house for sure. So, what about you? Did you grow up, living with cats as well?
Yeah, so my parents bought a house and it came with a cat that the people before us left. And shortly after we bought the house, she had a litter of kittens, and they all had she had four kittens, I believe, but we kept two of them. So it was Little Red, Louie, and Leo. And then a few years or a couple years later, under our gazebo, we heard some meowing and we found these tiny little kittens under there. And we ended up keeping two of those, Lily and Lincoln. We had a thing for L's apparently. And yeah, we had them. They were indoor outdoor cats. Spent a lot of time on the 7-acre kind of hobby farm that we had, and when they weren't out prowling for mice, they were inside kind of hanging out with us and sleeping.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that for both of our experiences, a lot of the times the cats are just coming to us. And that's actually something I hear people say, that the cat just knows when there's a spot available in the house. And it's not very scientific, but sometimes it does seem that way. Right after we actually moved to Oregon, Bo just showed up here. It was like he knew there was this little niche here that he could just weasel his way into and kind of make his way into our house.
We were actually supposed to put a deposit on a puppy right before we found Peach, and then she ran across the road in front of us, and you just cannot say no to a 1 pound, like 12-week-old kitten. She was just a wreck.
Absolutely, yeah. They pull at your heartstrings, that's for sure.
Yes, they do.
Not really that many people work with cats, let alone train them. And so when I tell people what I do, I usually get kind of one of two different reactions. People either think that it's a really cool job and that I kind of just play with kittens all day, which is only partially true. But I'll also kind of get this reaction of cats can do what? You can actually train them. And so there's this kind of skepticism. And so, is that something that you get as well? Just this idea that cats are an untrainable animal?
Yeah, there's been some negative responses, not as many as the positive, overall positive response that I've gotten about training cats, but I've gotten comments like cats don't need to be trained, and that the only reason why we would teach them tricks is to please the owner. And there's a really big misunderstanding there, and it's the assumption that cats don't like training and that it's a negative experience for the human and the cat. I've found that this simply isn't true. Peach, for one, comes running for her training sessions and sits on her area there and waits for me. And I think you've had some similar situations like this too, right?
Oh, yeah, especially Bo and Carl. When they are ready to work, they let me know. It's almost like this look that he'll get in his eye that when they sit, sometimes they're just sitting with this purpose. It's not just like a normal sit. It's like they sit and then they're waiting and looking at me for a reward. It's this idea that, look, I did it. I sat down. Don't I get a treat now? And so it's something I think a lot of pet owners don't think about is this idea that they're always training their cats. And so when you think about things like whenever you open a can of food, the cat comes running into the kitchen, that's because the cat associates the sound of the can opening with getting a meal. And so there is that training going on, whether you meant it to happen or not. And I've often heard this idea that we really shouldn't train cats because it's kind of taking away that independence from them. but we are training them and we're training them every day and every time we interact with them. And so it's really beneficial to just be more aware of those training principles and how our behavior can influence our cat's behavior.
Absolutely. Even if you are saying something negative to your cat, like shooing them away when they're trying to wake you up in the morning, that's still training them. And really, that's them training you because they have realized that if they're just persistent enough and they keep trying to wake you up and trying to wake you up, that at some point you'll get frustrated and do some action. It might be scolding them, it might be getting up out of the bed, it might be giving them food, which is the ultimate goal there, or, sometimes attention is the ultimate goal, but they're still working kind of working you down to try to get what they want. And if we teach them alternative behaviors to some of these more annoying ones, you really open the communication between you and your cat, and it gives them a different out besides those annoying things. And it allows you to understand what they want and be able to provide that for them without getting frustrated with them, and overall just improving the bond between you and your cat. I think some cats, we get them as kittens and they're super playful. And so we play with them. And then as the cat matures, I think that we have this thought that the cat is going to eventually lose that playfulness and just become kind of a sedentary part of the household, and kind of blend in with the furniture. Whereas that really doesn't need to be the case. If you keep up with the level of interaction that you do when they're kittens, and you keep up with the training, or just really any interaction that the cat's looking for, whether it's petting, whether it's play, whether it's training, they'll continue that into adulthood. And I think that that's a huge misunderstanding that pet owners face.
That brings up a really great point. I think this idea that people will do things with kittens, but they won't really continue that socialization later on when the cat's an adult. But I think even as kittens, we're treating cats very differently than we do puppies or dogs. So, for example, we don't really take cats to kitten training and socialization classes the same way we do with dogs. We take dogs out to dog parks and they come with us in the car and they do all these different activities with their owners that we don't really have cats engage in. And so that's been part of my research, was actually looking at what happens when we give cats these experiences, when they can leave the house and go to training and go for socialization activities. How does this impact their behavior? And so that's something we'll talk about at some point in this podcast. But I know that with Peach, you've done a whole lot of stuff with her ever since she was a kitten. And so, what kind of things were you doing to help socialize her?
Yeah, when she was a kitten, we took her to get takeout. She would come with us in the car if we were running errands and it wasn't too hot. One of us would just stay in the car with her while the other one ran into the stores. She came with us to a bunch of different places. We brought her to the local pet store and she would go run up and down on their cat trees that they had for sale. She met people that way. I used to have them give her treats to make it a little bit exciting to have a new person come up to her. I had visitors in the house. I brought her outside on leash. And I really tried to open the world for her in a way that wasn't going to be scary as she aged.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, that's exactly what I would tell someone who came to me looking for advice on their kitten. Just to really give them those positive experiences and show them that leaving the home isn't something scary. Because so often, what I'll see with cats coming into our lab is that they never really leave the home, or that just getting in the carrier is something frightening because last time they got in that carrier, they got shots or they got neutered, or it could be any number of things. So, kind of just breaking down that association that leaving the house or getting in the carrier isn't something scary, but it can be something good. And when you think about dogs or even humans, if we never gave children these experiences interacting outside of the home, they wouldn't necessarily be comfortable leaving the house and interacting with people either. And so it's not necessarily something about cats that makes them different, but it could be how we're treating them some of the time.
Absolutely. There was a study that came out that showed that cats who were carrier trained had less stress at the vet. Because if you think about it, and there's a great comic about this. It's two cats staring at a carrier, and it says, the one cat says to the other one, I go in there and I end up at the vet and then I get back in it and I'm back home. And it's kind of this, and they're like, is it a wormhole? And it's this idea that they go in the carrier, they have a traumatic experience because most of them don't know what the car is and don't like the rattling and the movement and things like that either. And then they go to the vet, they get poked and prodded by new people, and then they end up back home and they're like, what just happened? And that study was a great way to show that just some training and getting them used to being in these situations can really help to reduce stress.
Tori, through your work, have you had experiences encountering both the stereotypically aloof cats and the super social cats?
Yeah, so I would consider Peach and a lot of the cats that are in my programs to be pretty social cats. They tend to be social with other cats in their home, then they're social with people, and they love to train and they come up to you for training and ask for it. But there's also these cats who we would label aloof, and these are the ones that basically blend in with the furniture. And it leads me to the question of, are cats actually a solitary species or are they a social species?
Yeah, that's something that I actually like to discuss when I talk to audiences because you do hear those conflicting things. You hear that, oh, well, they come from a solitary ancestor, so domestic cats are solitary, but they interact socially with people, dogs, and other cats. And so, what are they? And that's one interesting thing about cats is that they can actually live both solitarily or socially, and they're what's known as facultatively social, which means that they show this flexibility in their social behavior. And so we do see these cats that live in a solitary state away from people and other cats, but we also see these cats living in human homes as well as cats living outdoors in these colonies together. And so for a long time, these colonies weren't really considered social groups because they form around these food sources, and people just kind of considered that they were random aggregations of cats, basically just kind of showing up for a meal and leaving. But there was no real, interaction or social bond between them. But the more research that's come out on this has actually found that actually cats prefer to spend more time with certain cats over others. And they basically coined this term preferred associates, which is basically just their friends. They like to interact with these cats over others. And so it does seem that there are social relationships, even outside of interactions with people, that cats are interacting socially with each other.
Speaking of friends, recently watched a documentary of cats in Istanbul. The documentary is called Kerby. I may be pronouncing that wrong. And it was really interesting. One of the cats that they followed had a home, and he was an indoor outdoor cat, which is typical to the Istanbul lifestyle with cats. And this cat had his home, had his family, and he would go out and he would go to the neighbor's house and he would go through the window, interact with the neighbor and the neighbor's cat, and had a whole set of relationships there. And I just found it so fascinating how he had this dual lifestyle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's actually an argument that I've heard when people are saying that cats don't bond to their owners. It's this idea that sometimes you'll have a cat that will leave the house and it'll go across the street to the neighbor and it might get some treats and some pets from that person. And people will say, oh, well, that shows that your cat doesn't love you if it's going across the street and getting treats from other people. But if you think about it as humans, if we go out and we interact with other people, that doesn't mean that we're not bonded to our family or to our partners. And even when we think about it in dogs, when dogs are social with strangers, it's actually seen as a good thing, not this idea that, oh, my dog wants to interact with strangers, so that means that it doesn't love me.
And I would actually think that that's a sign of a secure attachment for the ability of the cat to be able to leave the home, go off and interact with their preferred associates, and then to come home and spend most of their time with you.
Absolutely. And in our lab, we actually study the bond between cat and owner. And one thing we see in cats that are securely attached is that they are able to use their owner as a secure base from which to explore a new area. So it does make sense that cats that are securely attached to their owner are probably more likely to go out and interact with new people and new things and just be more comfortable with novel and new situations. And something I hear a lot are these blanket statements about cats, that cats are all one way. And I actually had a student this week when I was giving a talk on cat body language. And I had a picture up on the screen, and I was asking, how do you think this cat feels? And in the picture, the cat's tail's up and it's looking all confident, and the student goes, "Oh, it looks passive aggressive." And so I think that there's these ideas that people have about cats that aren't really holding true for every cat. And we just see a lot of that variation, that some cats are super social and some are less social. And it's just like with people, where you see a lot of variation in that personality.
Definitely. And it's it's passive aggressive is an interesting term. Um I think that when it comes to cat body language, they have less muscles in their face dedicated towards facial expression than dogs do. And I think for some people, it can be hard to read dogs, but really hard to read cats. And there's not a lot of information at this point out there on how to read cats, which is part of our goal in this podcast and in our own training programs is to educate people on how to do that. But I do find it really fascinating the complex terms that people put to cats, where they might just say a dog is happy or sad or something like that, whereas cats are spiteful and passive aggressive, and there's like an underlying motive of manipulation or something with cats that they've kind of collected over their history. So speaking of some of the research that's been done, can wild felines be social with humans as well?
That's a really good question. And there's actually been some research which found that even feline species, which are distantly related to the domestic cat, will still interact socially with humans when living in captive settings. And so these were socialized small wildcats living in a zoo. And the researchers found that they engaged in social behavior with zookeepers, such as rubbing on them and licking them. So, although cats don't really seem like a likely candidate to be social with people, maybe given certain conditions, there's several species of felines that have that potential to be domesticated. And though I really don't promote keeping these wild animals as pets, it's still interesting to note that several species of cats have a lot of that flexibility in their social behavior.
And that's fascinating because if we think about domestic dogs and cats, there's the theory that they are a neotenized or a more juvenile form of their ancestors. And cats and dogs now rely on humans to take care of their needs, such as providing food and shelter. And I wonder if there's a greater prevalence of these behaviors in zoo wildcats due to the caretaker relationship of having their food and water provided to them and thus not needing to work as hard for their resources.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I definitely think it's true because even in these free roaming cats, we see that when the resources are all together in one location, that's when they form these social colonies together. And when the resources are more dispersed, so the prey are just naturally occurring in the environment, that's when cats are more likely to live by themselves. And so, providing all those resources together does seem to shape that social behavior as well as socializing them to those experiences interacting with people. And again, I'm not promoting doing this with wild animals, but when we have animals living in zoos that are interacting with people on a daily basis, and we're not thinking that we're going to introduce them back into the wild or anything, it's just really interesting to see what happens when we interact with them in those settings. All right, Tori, so tell all of us who are interested in training our cats, how do you know if your cat's interested in training or if they want to have a training session at that moment?
Sure. So some cats, like we talked about before, will kind of come up and ask for training. But if you're just getting started in this and your cat doesn't have a great reinforcement history yet, so they haven't had a bunch of repetitions of training, it may be a little bit different. They may not know how to ask for training yet. So the way that you'll want to start this is with the basis of clicker training. And so you can play a simple game with them. So what we do is we associate the clicker with food to start with. So you can press the clicker and you can give them food. Well, you can turn this into a game. So you'll press the button of the clicker and it will make a tone. You'll take the treat and gently toss it away from you. Allow your cat to go and eat that treat, and if they come back, that's what shows you their willingness to interact with you. But if they eat the treat and then they walk away, they may not be in the mood for training in that moment. You can try again later. There's no harm in this. It doesn't mean that they don't like training altogether. You might just try a different time of the day. Sometimes they're full from recently eating a meal, or maybe you caught them at a time where they were busy watching birds or some other form of interaction in that moment.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And it's always good to look at your cat's behavior and their body language in order to keep that line of communication open with them and know when they're interested in training and when they're not. I think that that was a really great discussion today, and I'm really excited to hear what everyone thinks about this first episode. We'd love to hear about some of your experiences. What are some behaviors that your cats engage in? And are your cats very social with you or with other pets in the household? Please reach out to us on social media. We're on Instagram and YouTube as CatSci Podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts.
Kristen and I can't wait to continue this conversation on cat science in our next episode. CatSci Podcast is brought to you by Maui's Cat Behavior and Space Cat Academy. Visit us online at mauis.com and spacecatacademy.com.